The morning sun was barely peeking through the airport windows when Evelyn Marshall walked through the busy terminal. She had just finished a charity event where she'd spent the whole night helping at a homeless shelter, and honestly, she was exhausted. Her usually neat hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore her favorite old sweater, the one with the tiny hole in the sleeve that she never got around to fixing. Her jeans were comfortable but faded, and her sneakers had seen better days. As she made her way to Gate 14, Evelyn yawned and checked her watch. The flight from Chicago to Miami would give her just enough time to rest before her important board meeting tomorrow. She clutched her boarding pass tightly, feeling grateful for the first-class seat that would let her stretch out and maybe catch some sleep. When boarding was announced, Evelyn joined the line, her mind already on the warm blanket and quiet she'd soon enjoy. She smiled at the gate agent who scanned her ticket and directed her down the jet bridge. The familiar sounds of people settling into their seats filled the cabin as she stepped aboard Skyline Airlines Flight 2847. Finding row 2, Evelyn slipped into her window seat and sighed with relief. She placed her small bag under the seat in front of her and buckled up. Around her, other first-class passengers were getting comfortable. Businessmen in crisp suits tapping away on laptops, a woman in designer clothes sipping champagne, and a couple discussing their vacation plans. That's when she noticed the flight attendant staring at her. The woman, whose name tag read Karen, had perfectly styled blonde hair and a pressed uniform. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Evelyn's attention, it was the look in her eyes. Karen was looking at Evelyn's worn sweater and old shoes with obvious disapproval. Karen whispered something to another flight attendant, and both women glanced in Evelyn's direction. Evelyn pretended not to notice, pulling out her phone to check her messages. But she could feel their eyes on her, making her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't felt in years. The cabin was filling up now, and the atmosphere shifted. Karen approached Evelyn's row, her smile tight and artificial. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice carrying just enough doubt to be insulting. "May I see your boarding pass?" Evelyn looked up, surprised. "Of course," she replied politely, handing over her ticket. Karen studied the boarding pass longer than necessary, turning it over in her hands as if searching for something wrong. "And where did you get this ticket?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already had her own answer. "I booked it online, like everyone else," Evelyn responded calmly, though her heart was starting to beat faster. She could sense where this was going. Other passengers were beginning to notice the exchange. A man across the aisle lowered his newspaper, and the woman behind Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "I see," Karen said, still holding the boarding pass. "It's just that, well, we need to verify this. Sometimes there are mistakes." The way she said mistakes made it clear what she really meant. Evelyn took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "There's no mistake. That's my seat." But Karen wasn't backing down. She looked at Evelyn's clothes again, her expression growing more skeptical. "Ma'am, first class is for our premium passengers. Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Evelyn felt her cheeks grow warm, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar sting of prejudice. She'd worked too hard and come too far to let this moment defeat her, but the public nature of the confrontation made it especially painful. Around them, more passengers were paying attention. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. A few had even taken out their phones, sensing something newsworthy was unfolding. Karen's colleague joined her, and the two flight attendants stood in the aisle, creating a barrier between Evelyn and the rest of the first-class cabin. The message was clear. They didn't think she belonged there. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the woman they were trying to remove from first class had a secret that would soon change everything. The tension in the first-class cabin grew thicker by the second. Karen held Evelyn's boarding pass between her fingers as if it were something dirty, her eyes scanning it over and over again. The other flight attendant stood beside her, arms crossed, creating an intimidating presence that made several passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," Karen said firmly, her voice carrying throughout the quiet cabin. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket." Evelyn remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "What kind of issue?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. This ticket appears to be questionable. We need to verify its authenticity at the gate. A businessman in the row behind Evelyn cleared his throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable with what was happening. A young woman across the aisle had her phone out, recording everything. The red recording light blinked steadily, capturing every word. "My ticket is perfectly valid," Evelyn replied, meeting Karen's gaze directly. "I purchased it through your website 3 weeks ago." Karen exchanged a look with her colleague, then turned back to Evelyn. "Sometimes people obtain tickets through unauthorized means. We have to be careful." The implication hung heavy in the air. Several passengers gasped quietly. The man with the newspaper put it down completely, watching the scene unfold with growing concern. "Are you accusing me of stealing this ticket?" Evelyn asked, her voice calm but firm. Years of business meetings had taught her how to handle difficult situations, but this felt different. This was personal. Karen shifted her weight, suddenly aware that multiple phones were now pointed in her direction. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. We just need to follow protocol when something seems unusual." "What exactly seems unusual?" Evelyn pressed, knowing full well what Karen meant but wanting her to say it out loud. Karen gestured vaguely at Evelyn's appearance. "Well, first-class passengers typically present themselves differently." A collective murmur rippled through the cabin. The young woman recording shook her head in disbelief. An older gentleman 2 rows back spoke up. "This is ridiculous. Let the lady sit down." But Karen was committed now. She straightened her shoulders and used her most authoritative tone. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to insist you come with me. We can sort this out at the gate." Evelyn took a deep breath. She could feel the eyes of every passenger on her, could sense their mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Part of her wanted to reveal everything right then and there, but she knew timing was everything. "And if I refuse?" Evelyn asked quietly. Karen's face hardened. "Then I'll have to call security to escort you off the plane." "This is wrong," someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Evelyn looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of her fellow passengers. Some looked angry on her behalf, others seemed embarrassed by the situation. A few avoided eye contact altogether. She recognized this moment for what it was, a test not just of her patience, but of the airline's values. "Fine," Evelyn said finally, unbuckling her seatbelt with deliberate calm. "I'll go with you, but I want your full name and employee number." Karen blinked, surprised by the request. "That's not necessary." "Oh, but it is," Evelyn interrupted gently. "You see, I believe in accountability. When someone makes a decision, they should stand by it." As Evelyn stood up, she noticed more phones had appeared. The whole first-class cabin was now documenting the incident. She gathered her bag with dignity, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thank you all for your concern," she addressed the other passengers. "Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most uncomfortable moments." Karen led the way down the aisle, her earlier confidence beginning to waver under the weight of so many watching eyes. The other flight attendant followed behind Evelyn, as if worried she might try to return to her seat. As they reached the plane's door, Evelyn turned back one last time. The looks of support from her fellow passengers strengthened her resolve. What happened next would not just change her day, it would change the entire airline. The cabin door closed behind them with a soft thud, but Evelyn knew this was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Little did Karen know that the woman she was escorting off the plane held a secret that would soon turn her world upside down. The jet bridge felt longer than usual as Evelyn walked between Karen and the other flight attendant. Behind them, she could hear passengers discussing what had just happened, their voices a mix of anger and disbelief. The morning had taken such an unexpected turn, but Evelyn kept her head high, refusing to let this situation break her spirit. At the gate, 2 airport security officers were already waiting. They wore serious expressions, clearly briefed about the situation by Karen's earlier radio call. A small crowd of passengers from the waiting area had gathered, sensing drama unfolding. "This is the passenger with the questionable ticket," Karen announced to the security officers, her voice carrying an air of importance. "We need to verify her identity and how she obtained this first-class boarding pass." The taller security officer, whose badge read Johnson, looked at Evelyn with professional detachment. "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license. As she handed it over, she noticed how her hands remained perfectly steady. Years of facing boardroom battles had prepared her for moments like these. Officer Johnson examined the ID carefully, then looked at the boarding pass. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, confusion creeping into his voice. "But look at her," Karen interjected, gesturing at Evelyn's casual attire. "Does she look like someone who can afford a first-class ticket?" The words hung in the air, ugly and obvious. Several nearby passengers gasped. The other security officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly embarrassed by Karen's directness. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson addressed Karen, "we can't make assumptions based on appearance." But Karen wasn't backing down. "I've worked for this airline for 15 years. I know our first-class passengers. Something isn't right here." Evelyn had heard enough. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor," she said calmly. "The regional manager, if possible." Karen rolled her eyes. "The regional manager doesn't have time for." "Actually," Officer Johnson interrupted, "given the circumstances, that might be appropriate." He turned to his colleague. "Can you radio management?" Within minutes, a man in a sharp navy suit arrived, looking slightly out of breath. His name tag identified him as Richard Collins, Regional Operations Manager. He took in the scene. Evelyn standing dignified despite her casual clothes, Karen looking defensive, security officers appearing uncertain, and the growing crowd of onlookers. "What seems to be the problem here?" Richard asked, his professional tone masking his concern about the gathering crowd. Karen jumped in before anyone else could speak. "This passenger was seated in first class, but I have serious doubts about how she obtained her ticket. Look at how she's dressed. She clearly doesn't belong." "That's enough," Richard cut her off, his face flushing. He turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. May I see your boarding pass?" Evelyn handed it over, watching Richard's face carefully. He scanned it with a handheld device, and his eyebrows rose slightly at whatever appeared on the screen. "Ms. Marshall," he said, his tone suddenly more respectful, "your ticket is absolutely valid. You're more than welcome to return to your seat." Karen's mouth opened in protest. "But sir, I really think—" "Karen," Richard said sharply, "I suggest you return to your duties. We'll discuss this later." But Evelyn held up her hand. "Actually, I'd prefer to handle this now." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "If you'll excuse me for just one moment." She dialed a number, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The crowd watched in curious silence as she spoke quietly into the phone. "Yes, this is Evelyn. I need you to connect me with the board immediately." "Yes, it's urgent." Richard's face paled slightly. Something about Evelyn's tone, her confidence, made him suddenly nervous. Karen, however, remained oblivious, still convinced she was right. As Evelyn continued her conversation, speaking in low tones about corporate policies and immediate action, Richard's phone began to buzz. He glanced at the screen and his eyes widened. It was from corporate headquarters. The security officers exchanged glances, sensing the shift in power dynamics. The crowd of onlookers grew quiet, everyone straining to understand what was happening. Evelyn ended her call and smiled politely at Richard. "You should probably answer that," she said, nodding toward his still buzzing phone. With trembling fingers, Richard answered, "Yes, this is Richard Collins." His face went through several shades of pale as he listened. "Yes, sir, I understand. Right away, sir." When he hung up, he looked at Evelyn with a mixture of shock and recognition. The truth was beginning to dawn on him, and the implications were staggering. Karen, still standing nearby, watched the exchange with growing confusion. The moment of revelation was at hand, and nothing would ever be the same for Skyline Airlines. Richard's face had turned ashen as he slowly lowered his phone. His hand trembled slightly as he slipped it back into his pocket. The security officers noticed his sudden change in demeanor and exchanged worried glances. Something major was happening, and they could feel it in the air. Karen, still oblivious to the shift, crossed her arms defiantly. "Well, are we going to resolve this situation or not? The flight needs to depart on time." Richard swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. "Ms. Marshall," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, I need to apologize." "Apologize?" Karen scoffed. "For what? For doing our jobs? for protecting our first-class cabin from. Karen, please, Richard interrupted, his voice sharp with urgency. You don't understand. Evelyn stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. Her phone buzzed with a message, and she glanced at it briefly. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. That was the CEO on the phone, Richard continued, his words coming faster now. He wanted to make sure I understood exactly who you are. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, sensing something extraordinary was about to be revealed. Several people were still recording on their phones, capturing every moment. Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, please, don't tell me she knows someone important. That's what they all say when they're caught. She doesn't just know someone important, Richard cut in, his voice shaking. She is someone important. Evelyn's phone rang again. This time, she answered it on speaker. Yes, Patricia. A crisp, professional voice filled the air. Ms. Marshall, I've notified the entire board as requested. They're all quite concerned about the situation. Should I conference them in? That won't be necessary, Patricia. I think the message has been received. Evelyn's eyes met Richard's. Haven't they, Mr. Collins? Richard nodded vigorously. Yes, absolutely. Ms. Marshall, I cannot express how sorry. Wait, Karen interrupted, her confidence finally beginning to crack. What's going on? Who is she? Richard turned to Karen, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. This is Evelyn Marshall. She owns 55% of Skyline Airlines. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Karen's mouth fell open. The security officers took an involuntary step back. The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. She, what? Karen stammered, her face draining of all color. 6 months ago, Ms. Marshall acquired controlling interest in our airline, Richard explained, his words tumbling out. She's been traveling incognito to evaluate our customer service firsthand. Karen's legs seemed to weaken, and she grabbed onto a nearby counter for support. But she's wearing, she looks like someone you thought didn't belong in first class. Evelyn finished the sentence gently. Like someone you judged based solely on their appearance. The gathered crowd was buzzing with excitement. Comments like, I knew something was up, and this is unbelievable, floated through the air. Phone cameras continued to capture every second of the unfolding drama. I didn't know, Karen whispered, her earlier arrogance completely gone. I was just trying to. You were just trying to do your job, Evelyn asked. Tell me, Karen, is it your job to make assumptions about people based on how they're dressed? Is it your job to humiliate passengers in front of others? Richard stepped forward. Ms. Marshall, on behalf of Skyline Airlines, I want to formally apologize for this inexcusable behavior. This is not who we are as a company, isn't it? Evelyn challenged. Because from where I'm standing, this seems to be exactly who we are. At least, who we've become. The security officers shifted uncomfortably. They'd been called to remove someone who turned out to be their ultimate boss. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I never meant. I didn't realize. Evelyn held up her hand. The problem, Karen, is that it shouldn't matter who I am. Whether I own this airline or whether I'm a teacher, a nurse, or someone who saved for months to afford this ticket, every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The crowd nodded in agreement, many people filming and sharing the powerful moment. This wasn't just about one incident anymore, it was about something much bigger. Richard's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it and paled further. The corporate communications team is asking about the videos that are already circulating on social media. This is everywhere. Evelyn nodded calmly. Good. Sometimes the most important lessons are the ones learned in public. Now, shall we discuss what happens next? The power dynamic had completely shifted. The woman they had tried to remove from first class now held their careers in her hands. And everyone present knew that whatever happened next would change Skyline Airlines forever. The gate area had transformed into an impromptu town hall meeting. More passengers had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and the air buzzed with whispered conversations and the soft clicking of phone cameras. Evelyn stood at the center of it all, calm and composed, while Karen looked like she might faint at any moment. Ms. Marshall, Richard began, wiping sweat from his forehead. Please, let me escort you back to the aircraft. We'll upgrade you to our premium suite and—" "No," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "I think we need to address this situation right here, right now." She turned to face the crowd. "How many of you have ever felt judged by how you look? How many of you have been treated differently because someone made assumptions about you?" Hands slowly went up throughout the crowd. An elderly man in worn clothes nodded vigorously. A young woman in a hijab stepped forward, her eyes showing understanding. "This isn't just about me," Evelyn continued. "This is about every person who's ever been made to feel less than worthy because of someone else's prejudice." Karen stood frozen, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. I've ruined everything." Evelyn turned to her. "What you've done is show us exactly what's wrong with our training programs, with our corporate culture, and that's actually valuable information." Richard looked confused. "I'm not sure I understand, Ms. Marshall." "When I bought this airline," Evelyn explained, "I knew there were problems. But knowing and seeing are two different things. Today, I saw firsthand how we treat people we think don't matter. And that stops now." She pulled out her phone again and made another call. "Patricia, I need you to set up an emergency board meeting for this afternoon and contact our head of human resources. We're implementing new policies effective immediately." The crowd watched in fascination as the owner of the airline conducted business right there in the gate area. This was corporate leadership in action, raw and unfiltered. "Karen," Evelyn said, turning back to the flight attendant, "you're suspended, effective immediately." "But not fired." Karen's head snapped up, surprise evident on her face. "Not fired." "No, because I believe people can learn and change. You'll undergo intensive diversity and sensitivity training. You'll spend a month working in our customer service call center, hearing directly from passengers about their experiences. And then, if you show genuine growth, we'll discuss your future with the company." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's very generous, Ms. Marshall." "It's not about generosity," Evelyn corrected. "It's about transformation. Firing Karen would be easy. Teaching her, and through her, teaching others, that's the hard work that creates real change." She addressed the crowd again. "I want each of you to know that Skyline Airlines will be different from this day forward. We're going to implement unconscious bias training for all employees. We're creating a passenger advocacy department, and we're establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind." The crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Several people shouted words of support. The young woman who had been recording earlier stepped forward. "Ms. Marshall, I'm a social media influencer. This video already has 50,000 views and climbing. People are calling you a hero." Evelyn shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who happened to be in a position to make a difference. The real heroes are people who face this kind of treatment every day and still maintain their dignity." Richard's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. "Ms. Marshall, the media is picking this up. CNN, Fox News, everyone wants a statement." "Good," Evelyn replied. "Set up a press conference for this evening. We're going to be transparent about what happened here and what we're doing to fix it." She turned back to Karen one last time. "I want you to be part of that press conference. I want you to tell your side of the story, what you were thinking, why you made the assumptions you did. It won't be easy, but it's important." Karen nodded through her tears. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "That's all any of us can do," Evelyn said softly. "Learn from our mistakes and do better." As airport security began to gently disperse the crowd, Evelyn made her way back toward the plane. But this time, she walked with Richard at her side, already discussing the changes that would reshape Skyline Airlines. The flight to Miami would be delayed, but no one seemed to mind. They had all witnessed something far more important than an on-time departure. Behind them, Karen stood alone, her worldview shattered, but perhaps for the first time, truly seeing the impact of her actions. The real work of change was just beginning, and everyone present knew they had witnessed a pivotal moment in corporate history. The next 24 hours moved at lightning speed. By the time Evelyn's delayed flight landed in Miami, her phone had exploded with notifications. The video of the incident had gone viral, with millions of views across different platforms. Hashtag Skyline Airlines and hashtag First Class were trending worldwide. The press conference that evening was packed. Reporters from every major network crowded into the hotel ballroom, their cameras and microphones ready. Evelyn stood at the podium, wearing a simple but elegant business suit. To her right stood Richard, looking nervous but determined. To her left, surprisingly, stood Karen, her eyes red but her posture straight. "Good evening," Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. "Today, Skyline Airlines failed one of its passengers. That passenger happened to be me, the owner, but that's not what matters. What matters is that we failed in our basic duty to treat every customer with respect." Cameras flashed as she continued. "What happened this morning has shown us that we have serious work to do. Starting immediately, we're implementing sweeping changes." She outlined the new policies: mandatory diversity training for all 15,000 employees, a passenger advocacy hotline, and a complete overhaul of customer service protocols. "We're also creating a scholarship program for underprivileged students to pursue careers in aviation," she announced. "Because diversity shouldn't just be a policy, it should be our reality." When it was Karen's turn to speak, the room fell silent. She stepped to the microphone, visibly shaking. "I made terrible assumptions based on appearance," she said, her voice cracking. "I've spent all day thinking about why I did what I did, and I'm ashamed. I'm grateful for the chance to learn and do better." The press conference lasted 2 hours. By the end, even the most cynical reporters seemed impressed by Evelyn's approach to the crisis. Over the next few weeks, Skyline Airlines underwent a remarkable transformation. The diversity training sessions were intense and eye-opening. Employees shared their own experiences with bias and discrimination. Many, like Karen, had never truly examined their own prejudices before. Karen threw herself into her rehabilitation. During her month in the call center, she heard story after story from passengers who had faced similar discrimination. Each call chipped away at her old mindset. She started a journal, documenting her journey of understanding. The passenger advocacy department received hundreds of calls in its first week. People shared stories of being treated poorly because of their race, religion, disability, or economic status. Each complaint was investigated thoroughly, and changes were made. 3 months later, Evelyn held another press conference to update the public on the airline's progress. This time, Karen stood beside her as a full employee again, but in a new role, head of diversity and inclusion training. "I never thought the worst day of my career would become the most important," Karen told the assembled media. "Ms. Marshall taught me that mistakes don't define us, how we respond to them does." The airline industry took notice. Other companies began reaching out to Evelyn for advice on implementing similar programs. She started speaking at conferences, sharing the story of how a moment of discrimination became a catalyst for industry-wide change. 6 months after the incident, Skyline Airlines reported record customer satisfaction scores. Their diverse hiring initiative had brought in talented people from all backgrounds. The company's stock price soared as customers responded positively to the changes. But the most meaningful feedback came in personal letters. A young black girl wrote about feeling proud to fly Skyline Airlines because they treat everyone like they're important. An elderly man shared how a flight attendant had gone above and beyond to help him, treating him with dignity despite his shabby clothes. Evelyn kept every letter in a special file in her office. Whenever she faced tough decisions, she would read through them, remembering why the changes mattered. The incident that had started with humiliation in first class had sparked a revolution in customer service. News programs did follow-up stories showing how one company's commitment to change had inspired others. Business schools began teaching the Skyline turnaround as a case study in crisis management and corporate responsibility. Karen became a powerful advocate for change, traveling to other companies to share her story. "I was part of the problem," she would say. "Now I'm dedicated to being part of the solution." A year later, at Skyline's annual shareholder meeting, Evelyn reflected on the journey. "Sometimes our greatest failures become our most important successes," she told the crowd. "We didn't just change policies, we changed hearts and minds. And that's what real leadership is about." The applause that followed lasted for 5 full minutes. In the audience, Karen wiped away tears, not of shame this time, but of pride in how far they'd all come. 2 years had passed since that fateful morning in Chicago, and Skyline Airlines was barely recognizable from its former self. The company had become a shining example of what corporate responsibility could achieve, with other airlines scrambling to follow their lead. Evelyn sat in her office, looking out over the city skyline when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Marshall, you have a visitor. She says it's important." A young woman entered, clutching a worn notebook. "Ms. Marshall, I'm Alicia Thompson. I'm a journalism student, and I've been following your story since that day in Chicago." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Please, sit down. What can I do for you?" "I'm writing my thesis on corporate transformation, and Skyline Airlines is my main case study," Alicia explained. "But I wanted to ask you something personal. Do you still fly incognito?" Evelyn laughed. "I do, actually. Just last week, I flew from Denver to Seattle in economy class, wearing my old gardening clothes. Want to know what happened?" Alicia leaned forward eagerly. "The flight attendant welcomed me warmly, helped me with my bag, and treated me exactly the same as the businessman in the expensive suit next to me. When we landed, she even made sure I knew about our connecting shuttle service because she noticed I looked tired." "That must have felt amazing," Alicia said. "It did. But what felt even better was knowing this wasn't special treatment. This is how we treat every passenger now." Evelyn paused, looking at a framed photo on her desk. It showed her standing with Karen at a diversity conference, both women smiling genuinely. "What about Karen?" Alicia asked, following Evelyn's gaze. "Karen is one of our best success stories. She's trained over 5,000 employees in our diversity programs. Last month, she won a national award for her work in corporate inclusion. She often says that hitting rock bottom was the best thing that ever happened to her." The transformation hadn't been easy. There were months of hard work, difficult conversations, and resistance from some quarters. But gradually, the culture shifted. Employees started sharing their own stories, creating bonds of understanding across departments. The Skyline Foundation, which Evelyn established after the incident, had already provided scholarships to 200 students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Many were now working in aviation, bringing fresh perspectives to the industry. "We measure success differently now," Evelyn explained to Alicia. "Yes, our profits are up 30%, but what matters more is that our customer satisfaction scores are the highest in the industry. We receive letters every day from passengers who feel seen and respected." Just then, Richard knocked and entered. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you'd want to see this." He handed Evelyn a tablet showing a news article, "Skyline Airlines named most inclusive company in America." Evelyn smiled. "Remember when you thought we were ruining the company by making these changes?" Richard chuckled. "I've never been happier to be wrong. Our employee retention is up 40%, and job applications have tripled. Turns out, people want to work for a company that stands for something." After the interview, Evelyn took a monthly walk through the airport. She loved observing the changes firsthand. Employees helping passengers regardless of their appearance, multilingual signs making navigation easier, and staff members proudly wearing badges in different languages to assist international travelers. At the gate area, she noticed a flight attendant kneeling to speak with a young girl who looked nervous about flying. The attendant, it was Karen, was showing the child a special wings pin, explaining how brave pilots needed brave passengers to fly with them. Evelyn watched as Karen comforted the child, remembering the woman who had once judged her so harshly. The transformation was complete, but the work continued. They had created something bigger than just policy changes. They had fostered a culture of empathy. Later that evening at home, Evelyn received an email from a competitor airline's CEO. "We're implementing our own diversity program. Would you be willing to share your blueprint?" She smiled and began typing her response. The ripple effect continued to spread. The next morning, Evelyn boarded another flight, this time wearing casual clothes again. As she settled into her economy seat, a flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I help you with anything?" "No, thank you," Evelyn replied, returning the smile. "Everything is perfect." And this time, it truly was. The airline industry had changed, one heart at a time, starting with a moment of discrimination that became a movement for dignity. Sometimes, Evelyn reflected, our greatest challenges become our most powerful opportunities to make the world a better place.